that happens and leads us now into this crisis, because now the cost of Mealie meal goes up from about 150 kwacha over the last couple of years. It's about 320. Now, if your helper is getting a salary of about 1,200 kwacha, 25% is going to buy a bag of Mealie meal. How can somebody really survive?
Yeah.
So when you speak to those numbers and you compare to them, okay, average mate gets about 1,000, 1,200. You remove 300 just to buy Mealie meal. 25% of their pay has gone to buy one household item. How are they going to meet all the other basic necessities of their life? It's difficult. Hi, my name is Ntazana, and you're listening to Africa for Dummies podcast.
I am an African.
Welcome back to Africa for Dummies, where we unpack the stories shaping the continent beyond the headlines. This week, we're joined by Ntazana Kaulule, a Zambian economist and lawyer whose work explores land policy, debt, and development across Africa. Ntazana recently wrote a powerful piece on Zambia's cost of living crisis, highlighting how decades of data from the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflections, Basic Needs and Nutrition Basket, a bit of a mouthful, or BNNB for short, reveal a painful truth. That is, Zambia's GDP keeps rising whilst ordinary households are priced out of survival. We'll be talking about what the BNNB actually measures, how it exposes the gap between economic growth and lived reality, and what Zambia's current policies, from maize exports to IMF reforms, mean for the future of affordability and inequality. So, thank you very much, Ntazana, for joining us.
Thank you, Nathan, for having me. Great honor to join you on these very important conversations.
Yeah, and before we even begin, I just want to give a big shout out to Professor Chilwa, who put us in contact, and he has such an amazing Substack that I'm subscribed to, and we definitely put the link in the description for all those that are interested. Ntazana, just before we jump into it, just a little bit about yourself, who you are, what your interests are, just so people can sort of get into it.
Thanks, Nathan. So my name is Ntazana. I am born and bred and raised in Lusaka. I have a background in economics and law. So I did my first degree at Rhodes University in South Africa in economics. And thereafter, I went to the University of Reading in the UK. I did my master's in development finance. Then I worked in the financial services sector for a while. And while I was working, I had a passion to study law from before I even, got to university and did my economics. So I decided to enroll back into university to pursue my law degree. Into the second year of my law degree, I left for more employment, left the financial services sector, focus on studying, and then I took up a part-time lecturing position at the University of Lusaka, where I was lecturing undergraduate financial economics and supervising undergraduate dissertations for a period of time. And then subsequent to that, after I completed my law degree, I went to the dreaded Siame to do my bar exams. Yes. And then subsequently got into, practice. So I continued with academia while I was gaining experience in practice. And then also, so after I passed my bar exams, I worked a bit in the legal fraternity with a law firm. Then I went back to do consultancy and I continued to lecture. So right now my life oscillates between academia and consulting and doing a few other things with people like Professor Chilwa, who's a great friend, a great mentor, and a very important comrade in this work that we do.
Yeah, and that's really, really interesting journey that you definitely took from from economics, and which these are not easy things to study, by the way. So it's
Well, somebody has to do them, I
somebody
think.
has to do it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's very interesting how you went from economics to finance, which are I think very very important. So I think we get people, anyone that's listening knows that we have the right person to to have this
No.
discussion with. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think just to jump right into the piece that you wrote, used data from the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, Basic Needs and Nutrition Basket, again
Yes.
BNNB,
And
to show that whilst Zambia's GDP, gross domestic product, which is essentially the summation of the produce that the country has made, the value of all the produce that the country has produced, ordinary people are actually worse off. So how, could you explain that a little bit? It doesn't make sense. The country seems to be improving on, the metrics that people typically use, to value the success of a country, but then the ordinary people don't seem to see it. They seem to be getting much worse off.
Okay, so let me speak first a little bit about the basic needs and nutrition basket. So it's been around for almost 26 years. It was introduced in 1996 by the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection. And what it does is that it's a collection of the cost of essential food and non-food items required for a family of five to maintain a decent standard of living within the urban areas. So what it reflects is an ideal, not an actual, basket of what a family will require. So it doesn't express the actual expenditure. So how it's collected is that at the end of every month, the center sends out people, research associates, who will collect prices from multiple markets, representing low, medium, and high density areas in Lusaka and other urban centers, and then just track the change in the cost of those food and non-food items. So it's an important barometer in terms of showing where really the pain or the comfort is coming from for the average Zambian, and that is in what they consume. So, of course, we all know the problem that we were faced with the last decade or so, massive accumulation of debt. Subsequently, that, culminated in us defaulting on our debt, and a lot of our variables were very bad. Our debt carrying capacity was bad. The interest payment that we're paying is extremely high. And then obviously that was compounded by the COVID pandemic, which made just economic issues in the country really, really bad. So, of course, you now have the momentum of the new government coming in, doing and implementing a number of policies. And then we see these variables, the GDP is picking up and saying, well, we've got growth that's, we had negative growth, around the 2021s, and we've got now positive numbers. All of these things are happening. So your gross domestic product, basically, if it's growing, it's showing that your production capacity is growing. So there must be opportunities, of course, for people to earn a living and have a decent living, right? But when you look at what should be happening with GDP growth, it seems it's the opposite. Okay? So you've got growth that's happening, but the cost of things is going up for people. And you ask yourself, what is going on here? Now, in this environment where you're having growth happening, remember, we default 2020 on our debt. We decide as a country to approach our creditors to restructure our debt. And obviously we go with the common framework of the IMF, which has been a very painful process because it took far much longer to get to a point where we've agreed how much debt is going to be agreed to. But in that process also, we approach IMF, okay, for a facility. And that IMF facility comes with conditions. comes with conditions that obviously because your debt carrying capacity is bad, you need to reduce the deficit. And we see an implementation of policies that involve the removal of subsidies on fuel. We see the increase in electricity tariffs to reflect cost or to be cost reflective, as it were. Okay. So all those subsidies that filter into the ordinary Zambian are now withdrawn. So you then have the direct pain then of bearing that particular cost. So on the one hand, your variables are saying you've got GDP growth, but when it comes to the cost of things, input costs, for instance, fuel, electricity, all those are input costs into production, increase. So what you have then is that the cost of things are increasing. So all of these variables are going up. Wages pretty much have stagnated. They've remained pretty much the same. Yeah. Inflation is high. The cost of things is going up. Ultimately, what happens? You can't have the benefit. You can't feel the benefit of that particular growth. Because if your economy is growing, opportunities also to, in layman's terms, to make money must become more and more accessible, and more people should be able to access those opportunities. But those things are not happening. So in the end, we just have a number that's telling us the economy is growing, but I can't feel, right. my relative in Garden Compound cannot see what that 6%, 3%, 4% growth is, because all he or she is seeing is 20 kwacha I was able to buy half a tray of band 2 months ago. Today I'm buying 1/4 of a tray of band. So that cost has gone up. That's what they're seeing. But they will not have the explanation of saying, oh, the reason why your bands have gone up is because there are no subsidies on electricity. Now the cost of electricity has gone up, so we have to charge you more. Or because of the energy crisis that we've had as well. People are relying on gensets, so they have to buy fuel. In the end, who bears the cost? The ordinary guy bears the cost. So that's where then you have the mismatch. From a policy point of view, some of the things we've adopted have directly filtered into, the cost of doing business, the cost of living. Getting on a bus is now expensive. Maybe from Chelson to town, I was paying 15 kwacha before they removed the fuel subsidies. Now I'm paying 25 kwacha. Same income in the midst of growth, So you have a particular kind of problem and challenge.
Yeah, no, I think just to sort of put what you said into, pun intended, the nice basket. But you mentioned, these are, so the IMF, so we had these loans from the IMF in the past, which we defaulted on, especially. I think we were the first country to actually default during COVID, I think.
Yes, we were. So obviously the cocktail of loans are commercial loans. You've got some bilateral loans. You've got loans from China, and it just became unsustainable. We couldn't pay, not necessarily the IMF. But we went for an IMF program first and said we need assistance to create fiscal space. And IMF says, well, for us to give you this money that will create fiscal space, you need to cut, fuel subsidies. You need to cut electricity subsidies. They need to be cost effective. You need to cut some of the expenditure, that you basically have to reduce your budget deficit to a level that we agree to. And you have your hands tied once you get on IMF programs like that.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain degree, it sort of gives you the... because this isn't new, right? I mean, especially in Zambia's history, we've had situations like this where in Zambia, I think at the time it was the World Bank that came in and sort of liberalization was sort of the thing of the day, and sort of see the same situations. But it's really sad to see, especially because I think there was a time when Zambia, there was some debt forgiveness, and Zambia literally had everything.
Yes. So, I mean, you you can go back as far as the 1970s when we first got onto our IMF program. The first IMF program we ever got onto was around 1970s after a commodity price crash. Remember, we get independence, right? Political independence. And then you have, there's a push during Kaunda's time for the Matero and the Mulungushi reforms that basically nationalized companies. And we had to pay to acquire those companies, So for some of the companies, we issued bonds, what are known as the Zimco bonds, to buy the mines. And we had put a bet that, copper prices would continue and the revenue from there would be able to pay for those bonds. So you have a commodity price crash in the early 1970s. And we got onto an IMF program. So we've been on a number of IMF programs since 1970. Early 1970s. Then, of course, you have that crisis going on into the 80s. Then we have multi-party democracy come back in 1991. The MMD government, obviously, then with the structure adjustment programs, the infamous sub-programs that, as a condition of getting assistance from the IMF, you need to liberalize your economy. You need to make changes. And that was a very painful period. Okay?
Yeah.
Didn't resolve our debt until we came to HIPIC in the early 2000s, the Jubilee campaigns for debt cancellation, quite similar to what is happening at the moment by the late Pope Francis, who left a commission to push for debt cancellation. So in 2000, we have a Jubilee campaign for debt cancellation. 2005, we reach HIPIC completion point. We have our debt massively written from over, around about $6 billion to under $1 billion. So you have then that opportunity to really, and things from, 2005 begin to pick up. Copper prices begin to go up. You have the Mwanawasa government introduce some very radical reforms around the infamous, or should be famous, windfall taxes, arguing, look, when we sold the mines, the copper prices were here. Surely, prices have gone up. We should be able to benefit from that. And so we had that windfall tax introduced, which was a very, very important and very helpful concept because it helped raise monies from there. But, Mwanawasa dies, we've got change of presidency, and subsequently we've got change of government. We are reclassified as a low to middle income country. And obviously, we have access to international lending markets. Since we are now a low medium income country, you don't qualify for concessional loans in a sense. So where do you go? We have our first Euro bond. And we know then what history is like after 2012 and what happens. And we end up in that particular problem. And basically 15 years after HIPIC, we are back again on another IMF
in the same
program.
Position. Wow. Thank you for taking us through that, because I didn't really understand. It can be a bit frustrating, especially because I was the kid during that time. So, you hear these things and then now it's like, oh, we're back in the same position, which is really sad. But just to move on to something I think that also kind of is related, strongly related to it, which is, the maize exports, or maize in Zambia. So for those who don't know, maize is a very, very important crop. Some might argue it's the reason why we actually have a multi-party democracy today. But, you and Dr. Chewa note that the government allowed maize exports even when production had dropped, which worsened food prices locally. For listeners who might not follow these policies closely, could you walk us through what went wrong exactly and what a better approach would look like?
Okay, so maybe to give some context would be very important. When we had that the reintroduction of multi-party democracy in 1991, right? Immediately after the government comes into power, we had a massive drought, a big drought that resulted in, I don't know how many of our listeners would know the importation of corn from the US, which was infamously called yellow maize, okay, because we didn't have enough maize, and so you had to buy corn. Was imported. Some of it was given, as part of the aid package. So you have that kind of food insecurity with that particular drought, but things do improve subsequently. But when Mwanawasa comes into power in 2001, I think about 2002, he introduces what is known as FISP, Farmer Input Support Program. And one of the issues and the aims of that was to make Zambia food secure. So FISP was subsidized agriculture imports that were given mostly to peasant farmers to grow. And since we are very dependent on rain-fed maize, so the FISP program will start around about August 10. So in about 2001, we were producing maybe 100 million metric tons of maize. But by 2021, when we've got this program going for nearly 20 years, we were hitting the 3 million metric tons mark of maize production. So we had that record in 2021 of the 3 million metric tons of maize at the time. And so what was happening is that you have the peasant farmers and how it worked. Given these inputs at a subsidized price, once they grow and harvest, they'll go and sell to FRA. And FRA would then store some of the grain, periodically sell and release and things like that. But from about 2017, there was a tax of about 10% on maize exports, right? So if you're going to export any maize product, you would have to pay a tax in that sense. So we have this bumper harvest. We've got some maize in reserve that gives you over 4 million metric tons of maize. And then we have the current government coming to power in August 2021. And one of the first things that the Minister of Finance does is that he removes that maize export tax that was imposed.
Wow.
Okay. And so, in a sense, I think that encourages then people to begin to export maize. Okay, so this is after you've had a bumper harvest, and people say, we have enough maize. So there's an export of maize. When you look at the Bank of Zambia annual reports, you look at export earnings from maize. We went from, I think, was it 2021 or 2020, where you have export of maize in about $55 million. 2022, we had about 105, so almost doubling in terms of revenue come from maize export. Wow. So we then export these large amounts of maize. And in 2022, we have a drop in the harvest number. So you're exporting and your output then drops. So in the midst of a drop in output, obviously you would put brakes on saying you don't export. Then immediately after that, we have a drought. So we then have, a compounding effect of some of these decisions where you export because you seemingly had a lot of maize, but your immediate harvest shows a drop from 3 million down to, I think, about 2.7 million metric tons. So we were down by almost 1 million metric tons in numbers of maize harvested. So obviously, from a policy point of view, you'd expect an intervention, but that didn't come immediately. Because if you look at the numbers also of exports 2023, for maize, it's about 50 or 55 million. So it's not small money. So we're still exporting. But this is in the middle of a drop in your production. And then subsequently also you've got a drought that comes in 2020 to 2023 maize season. So that policy of removing the tax and encouraging exports of maize to earn revenue and take advantage of marketing opportunities by the countries around us, I think was was an important policy failure in terms of we could have stopped the moment we saw that our harvest numbers were not correct. We could have put a stop and, not have the crisis that we ended up having in 2023, because you just don't have adequate maize.
Right.
So those are some of the things that the paper that Dr. Chelwa and Bernadette wrote, which I make reference to in that particular blog post, as an indication of policy failure that happens and leads us now into this crisis, because now the cost of mealie meal goes up from about 150 kwacha over the last couple of years. It's about 320. Now, if your helper is getting a salary of about 1,200 kwacha, 25% is going to buy a bag of mealie meal. How can somebody really survive?
Yeah.
When you speak to those numbers and you compare to them, average mate gets about 1,000, 1,200. You remove 300 just to buy mealie meal. 25% of their pay has gone to buy one household item. How are they going to meet all the other basic necessities of their life? It's difficult. It's tough.
Yeah, that's really hectic. I mean, because on one hand, but I like the way you put it, because I was going to say, because from my perspective, like, I tend to be a bit sympathetic, because I think that the decisions that they have on hand are not, I would say, like, are how can I say, they've been dealt really bad cards, I guess one could say. But I think, as you said, I think to immediately notice the situation and immediately put a stop to the policy, I think would definitely have helped. Would you say, just a brief credit, would you say, do you think you'd ever see the prices of mealie meal going in the other direction?
You are an agriculture economist, you know as well as I do that the prices are what? Sticky downwards. It's very difficult usually,
go backwards,
to see prices regress when they've gone up significantly. Obviously, we had a very good harvest in this past maize marketing season, an excellent improvement given what we've experienced. But the evidence of how good that will be for the ordinary person is yet to be seen, or will be seen in terms of can they afford the staple food, which is maize. It will be good to see the prices go down, but I don't know. I mean, generally prices are sticky downwards, wages are sticky upwards. So it's a case of it's a case of what is going to give. Is there an incentive? And in the midst of a continued energy crisis, everybody will be saying that no, it's still very expensive. We want to reduce the price, but I still have to buy diesel to run my genset to produce the maize. So there are multiple things that need to happen before possibly we can see that. So hopefully we can see an improvement in the energy situation. Hopefully we can get good rain this year and see our energy production, improve, even what is coming online in terms of solar. All of these are things that if we want to see the prices go down, are things that we need to push really hard as a country.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good perspective, and hopefully it hasn't fallen on deaf ears. But just to go back to, I think we've been talking about the austerity measures, removing fuel and the subsidies, and how they've increased the cost of living for the ordinary Zambian. From your perspective, does Zambia have any other real alternatives when it comes to such agreements? Or are we forced to follow these measures no matter the local impact?
Well, I mean, when you look at the cocktail of measures that come with IMF, it's not as though we're not fully aware of what an IMF program entails. Whether our hands were tied is a question of of fact. But we did have options at the time before getting onto an IMF programs. People had warned, for instance, Professor Cello was one of the people who wrote extensively about the danger of an IMF program and finding an alternative. Because look, we get on an IMF program, we were hoping for quick and speedy resolution of our debt situation. It wasn't done. We only had agreements coming almost 3 years down the line. As we stand of our 12, 13 billion debt, only 49% has been restructured. The other is still unrestructured. We have agreements in principle to restructure about 92% of the debts. But that's just an agreement in principle. It's not actually been restructured yet. Those conversations are still ongoing. So the secretary to the Treasury had made a presentation sometime, I think was either June, July, about the status of our debt situation in terms of the budget performance. That's something that I make reference to in that particular blog post. The numbers are there.
Yeah.
Okay. 49% restructured successfully, 92% agreement in principle. So we still have more than 50% of our debt still in limbo. But what's happened with all of this is, as our economic variables have improved, debt repayment, for last year, in fact, for this year was projected over $1 billion. In the budget that the Minister of Finance presented to Parliament for next year's budget, we anticipate to pay close to $1 billion in principal and interest repayment for our debt. Okay.
Wow.
So we've restructured debt, but we are paying interest and principals close to the pre-default level, because just before we defaulted, our interest and principal repayments was about $1.2 billion, and that's what caused us to default. Yeah. So you are asking, with these improvements, who's the beneficiary? Is it the Zambian, or is it for us to pay our debts? Okay. So I think the opportunity to have found an alternative was missed at the initial step of how we approached our debt restructuring. We could have used a different mechanism of going to the creditor. And we knew our biggest creditor was China. Why did we not engage directly? Why didn't the government choose that particular path? But hindsight is 2020 vision, as they say, isn't it?
Right.
So we missed that vote. Can the government push back? We are under this condition. They're still obligated to meet what they signed up to with the IMF program. Right. So you've seen the push has been to reduce the budget deficit. If you look at those numbers, they have been reducing significantly. But what that means also is that if you're reducing your budget deficit, your government is also constrained, in a sense, in terms of what they can spend and how they can effect measures that cushion the most vulnerable in our society, right? So, I mean, even now, if they wanted to intervene and say, we bring back subsidies in the energy sector, it would be very difficult because we already signed up to it. So I think the start point is always critical to explore what options do we have on the table, what will work best in the interest of the current circumstances we are faced with, and thinking of what is the impact of whatever route we choose on the most vulnerable in our society. If we begin with that as the baseline, and we look at those who are most vulnerable in our society, how would they be impacted? Okay. People who are, in jobs and things like that might be able to survive and navigate the challenges that come with that. Like I said, my cousin in Garden Compound can't afford the solar system, right? To continue surviving. They probably can't, afford to buy solar lamps. So if we make a policy decision, the question is, what is the impact on the guys at the bottom? If we start from there, I think we'll be a bit more circumspect in terms of the policies that we adopt. But for now, we are where we are. Right? So we've beaten the bullet. It takes a lot of courage, I think, from the Minister of Finance to, take a position. But we might need that if this continues. If we continue with the energy crisis, we continue with prices continuing to rise. I don't know. We might need some restoration, rethink of a policy prescription that we have.
Yeah, but before we sort of go into some of the policy prescriptions, I just wanted to also discuss, like, what do you think this does for the middle class? Because I think we've talked a lot about the bottom of the pyramid. I don't know if that's a politically correct term, but like, don't you think that, because I think another concern is that, like, now I think with everything that's been happening, the middle class in Zambia is like slowly eroding away. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think it's a fair assessment. Everybody is feeling the pinch of the cost of things in the country. I mean, if you're having extended hours of load shedding, your productivity will obviously go down, right? Yeah. Wherever you are, your production is going to go down. And if you have to find alternative mechanisms to sustain your business, you obviously then have to buy a genset, run a genset. It means your cost structure just changes and your pricing for goods and services changes. So it's not just the guys at the lower end who will feel that change. Even the people in the middle and the upper part will feel the pinch, because in the midst of all of this, you see, if prices are going up at the same rate as wages are changing, people's real income, their purchasing power remains. But if your wages are not going up, doesn't matter where you are, whether you're at the bottom or the top, it will erode your purchasing power eventually, because of the inflation that those price changes are going to have. So the erosion, I do think, is a fair assessment that's happening. Anyone you would speak to would tell you how challenging the cost of living is. So people have had to adjust a lot. If there's an energy crisis, I never set out to buy an inverter and solar panels and things. So I've got a capital expenditure that I need to now think about. So how many people will be able to do that to remain productive? So it affects the country at multiple levels. And that cost is real. I think if you speak to people in Zambia, we're all feeling the pinch. We are feeling the pinch.
Definitely. That's definitely true. And I guess giving you, I guess, a very difficult task. In the article, just moving to, you show that average earnings rose by only 0.5%. I think we've also discussed that the average earnings haven't really increased that well, and 0.5% is really, really low. Between 2022 and 2023, whilst inflation rose by nearly 20%. What does that tell us about inequality in Zambia, and also what kind of wage or policy reforms could help close that gap between income and living costs? Do you think we're heading down a South Africa sort of path, or where you have such stark, inequality? What say you?
I mean, very difficult. My brothers in South Africa will lynch me. So, I mean, when you and this data on all of these, for instance, that we're talking about, this information, this is publicly available information. So you look at the labor force survey, which is done, by the Ministry of Labor, looking at, wage conditions, a variety of things that they look at. And one of those is the average monthly earning. Okay. So you'll find that on average, a Zambian is earning, 5,340, right? That's the average earning. That's almost like your middle class kind of earning. People who probably got degrees, working in a relative. But so this is a basket of people. You've gotten people, from the low end, from the middle, from the end. You put them together. And so on average, how much is the Zambian getting? 5,300. You look at what the ideal basket of, food and non-food items for a family of 5. If you live in Lusaka at the moment, it is at 11,000 or thereabout, just over
Wow.
11,000, right? So
Wow.
we give that figure in the paper. So you've got wages that already can't even buy half or just buy half of your basic needs.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have a massive problem already that you have. And you can see it on average that it's quite expensive to survive. So you put in, now you add all these other things that you have to consider, buy fuel if you're running a genset or whatever it is that you're doing. So from a policy point of view, when the government starts looking at minimum wages, I think the starting point should be, what's the average costs for somebody to survive on average in some of these places. I know the business sector always talk about, then labor will be very expensive. We are following that. But what is the value of somebody going to work if they're working so hard and they can't afford to put food on their table because the costs are just prohibitive, right?
Right.
So one of the things I think what the basic needs and splendid work that our friends at the Jesuit Center for Political Reflection do is they give us a baseline and tell us if we're going to talk about minimum wages and things like that and looking to improve the welfare of our people, here is a fairly objective measure to use. We can't talk of minimum wages in certain sectors and say, well, it will be 2,000 or 300,000 kwacha. But this guy is living in a place where it will cost him 11,000 kwacha to survive. How is he going to make up that particular deficit? So I think it's important then in that perspective that we begin from there and build our policy. Because like I said earlier on, our policies as a country must look at the interest of the least amongst us.
The bottom of the pyramid.
That must be the starting place. Don't start off with a guy in the middle. Don't start off with Ntazana who's got a degree who can find his way around. Okay, it will be a very bad policy. It must start with, John Peary, who is in Kalingalinga. Can he survive on this minimum wage given the cost of things? So that's what I would say around those particular policy issues.
Before I ask my last question, what do you think hinders then that sort of thought process? Because I think that would come, quite obvious to some, someone's mind that, hey, we need to first care for the least among us. So what do you think sort of hinders that change, I guess, or yeah?
I do think it's the ideological position one takes, whether it's by training or by policies. All these policies we have are informed by ideology. Okay, so if I take a socialist kind of ideology and I think about the people in my constituency, what is needed for them, I put people at the center of the policy, not the policy at the center of people. My ideology changes. If I'm looking to the markets to resolve this and I take sort of a very neoliberal position, I'd say, the markets are efficient. The markets will give us distributive efficiency. They will be, all of these wonderful terminologies we like to use in economics. And we're saying, the markets will resolve that. The markets will never resolve things for the poor. Mm-hmm. They'll never take into consideration the poor. But if we can use the ideology and say, well, where do we place people? These are our priority. Remember, governments exist for the people. They're there to work for the people. So if we forget the notion of putting people smack bang in the center of our policy, then, of course, and if we put business interests first, then, of course, it's very difficult to advance an argument that minimum wages should be at least be equal or close to the basic nutrition and needs basket. Because now you're thinking about people. But if we put profits first for businesses and we advance business empires as being the be-all and end-all of our policy, we will forget about the people and we will end up where we might be with the crisis that we have. So ideology around economic policy is extremely important. Can we interrogate and say, what is informing our policies? What kind of ideological standing do I have? Or do our people in government have? What do we want to advance? What is important and critical to us? Once we clarify that, it's very easy then to resolve the issues around, where do we place people? Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there was also, I'm forgetting the author's name, but there was a book that was talking about something about that. I think it's actually called How to Operate in Bottom of the Pyramid Markets. But he said that the book starts with the very same thing of the, mentality and the ideology is really important. But
Yes.
so my last...
Before you go to your last question, if you look at our founding fathers, Kaunda, and people then, they would talk about the common man. Okay, we exist for the common man. That's a very important ideological position because it shows that the systems exist to save man.
People.
Okay,
yeah,
and put them at the center. So you could search Kaunda's speeches, and you will find him repeatedly referring to why the government exists, what the government must do for the ordinary, why we must focus our efforts on the ordinary person. Because he knew that if we neglect people, the ordinary person, the focus will be on profits. And if it becomes on profits, you have an exploitation that goes on and you have a lot of people disenfranchised. But sorry to cut you, as you were about to
No worries. I think that's a very good insert. But my last question is basically, given this reality, given the rising prices, the stagnant wages, the IMF austerity measures, what can we as ordinary Zambians do, or civil society organizations, what can they do to push for fairer economic policies? Are there small actions or collective movements that sort of give you hope?
I think the starting point is always to take a very keen interest in the affairs of our country as individuals. Like I said, the blog I wrote is based on publicly available information. Obviously, it's information scattered. You have to spend some time to bring it together. But we must take a keen interest and have these conversations and have them in a very objective way. Here are the facts. Can we engage with our people and say, these are the facts of and the reality that we are feeling? Yeah, you're telling me there's 5% GDP growth. No, but I'm telling you, I am paying a lot of money just to survive. So we've got to engage. There's a lot of work that civil society is obviously doing in highlighting all of these issues to do with inequality. The rising cost obviously pushes people down. And, you asked earlier on, will we have a case where inequality is growing? Yes, it is growing because the poor are being pushed further and further down. And the wealthy are going further and further higher because they've got access to all of these resources. So you definitely have a growth in inequality. But if you and I can have these conversations, these are not easy conversations to have, but if we can have them objectively, and so what are the facts? There's this that's happened, it's positive. There's this that's negative that has happened. Where do we find a confluence or a place where we can begin to engage and have some influence around what we should be doing? So obviously engaging constantly. Will we have disagreements? Of course, we are coming from different standpoints. We'll have disagreements, but that should not discourage us from engaging. I think also importantly for civil society and other organizations to highlight the plight of the ordinary Zambian as a result of all of these policies. It's easy for me to sit in my air-conditioned office and not feel I don't have any obligation, but we do have an obligation to our fellow man to raise these issues, highlight them, so civil society can increase visibility around these issues around debt. Look, there's been a lot of work that's been done by civil society before debt default, after debt default, highlighting the issues around IMF, highlighting about the growing inequality, highlighting issues around, stagnation in wages, and what energy crisis is coming. So we just have to continue and be, in a sense, relentless. We shouldn't give up. Something at some point will turn.
That's a good point. I think even this is part of the reason why our channel sort of exists, is that we are trying to sort of have those objective conversations and not sort of go into other things. My last question would be: would you be optimistic, pessimistic about the future? Briefly, optimistic, pessimistic.
Well, I'm sort of a little bit pessimistic at the moment because we are not yet out of the woods with our debt situation, and already we've started paying back huge amounts of money, $1 billion, in interest and principal payments. It's huge, right? So this year, probably we'll cross the billion mark. Next year, close to $1 billion mark. So I'm a bit pessimistic about, am I going to see the benefits filter of this economic growth to the ordinary person? But I'm hopeful, even in my I'm hopeful that there can be a brighter day. I mean, the bumper harvest has given us hope that hopefully food prices in terms of the staple that we have, which is our mini meal, will go down. Hoping that we have good rains this year as well.
Again.
And we can have, good power generation in the coming year, just lowering those load shedding hours, because they're really, really painful. In some places, you have only 4 hours of power. It's really, really painful. So hoping for a very, very good rainy season. If things can turn around in that perspective, then hopefully we can begin to make traction upwards and people can begin to see the real benefit of the economic growth that we are projecting. I think next year is projected for 6%. Hopefully with those things coming, we can really begin to see that. So caught between a rock and hard place at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll call it cautious optimism.
Very, very cautious.
Yeah. No, on behalf of all of our listeners and my co-host Zenke as well, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Ntazana, for taking the time, and hopefully maybe we can have this conversation next time, and it will be a bit more
optimistic with the good
optimistic,
Greatly honored, Nathan, to have been invited. Very grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and just encouraging that you continue and everybody can sort of engage with these things. There's a lot of information out there. When we look for it, we can see how our country is performing and provide, suggestions and solutions that can be implemented for the better of our country.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. So to all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Nathan.
I am an African.